Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to How to Run a Webinar using GoToWebinar. We'll keep this short and sweet. I do have a couple of pages of handouts for tips for whoever's going to be the moderator, and we're just going to run through some of the bells and whistles of the back end really quickly. Let me go into, let's see, from beginning. When you go to the GoToWebinar link to register, it's going to ask you to download a small bit of software. If you've already done it before, just wait for a moment and it will actually say it downloads again, but it doesn't actually need to do that, and then it will start automatically. This is going to be the first screen that you're going to log into, and in order to go to start a webinar or schedule a webinar, you're going to click on, obviously, schedule webinar. I do want to note something, that if you are running the presentation, you can either use your back and forth arrow keys on your keyboard, or something that's recommended is down at the bottom right. If you see where my mouse is, there's going to be a couple of back and forth arrow slides. Just be prepared for either of those to occasionally glitch, so you'll have to click it again. GoToWebinar, for some reason, that happens to happen too often too. Now, the important thing about scheduling a webinar is putting the title in, putting a description in. You can do multiple sessions for thing or one sessions. The start date time, or start time, end time, and make sure you have this specifically set Eastern time. And if you're sending this out, especially to other people in other time zones, just make the note, even though this says Eastern time zone, just make sure that they realize that, again, even though this will say this in the registration link, just because people don't really look at that sometimes. And then you'll hit schedule. It's fairly easy to walk through the scheduling process for this. So we'll go into here. And once you've scheduled that webinar, you can always go back. There's a bunch of things you can do with it. You can share it, you can edit it, copy it. You can do practicing, or right now, for example, if we were using this as a demo, this would be in session. And if you go back to this, there's going to be a list here that'll give you past webinars, upcoming webinars. It'll give you some more information in here. And if you go back into edit, this is where you can add some additional information. You know, some people can log in directly by using their mic and speakers. Some people can log in by phone and actually just watch the video, but they'll actually be, listening through a regular phone or listening through a mobile phone. You can also do branding and themes, organizers, panelists. This is the link down here that will get sent out to everybody to register. Your best bet is setting this webinar up as far in advance as you can and putting this link out there in as many places as you can do. And this is also where you will find how many attendees have registered. It will give you their email addresses as well. And this is where you'll also set up reminders. So you can have reminders that will go out, a week before, a day before, an hour before. The more reminders that you have, honestly, sending out, the better. And the best way to do this is make sure that you also have a follow-up reminder email. You can customize everything that's in here. So when you start this, as I mentioned, you're going to see this verifying the meeting ID. Just be patient. If you have a co-presenter, make sure that they log in advance, and make sure that you also do a test run in advance. Even if they've used GoToWebinar lots of times before, make sure that you and they get together and do a test run, whether it's a few days before, a week before, and make sure you guys get on, the earlier the better, so at least, if not more time before the actual webinar is scheduled to go in session. I don't know how many times we've done a webinar where the co-presenter shows up at the last minute and then there's technical difficulties and we start running late. And that's not the best way to do this. One of the other reasons for the co-presenters to log in earlier is they'll also have to download the software as well. Now these are some screenshots of what your home screen will look like. And I just keep this in mind that the screen that you're going to be looking at onto the right-hand side is going to give you a lot of bells and whistles. And the screen that the attendees are going to see is not going to necessarily be the same thing that you see. They're not going to see on-air showing screen. They're not going to see show your screen. They're not going to see the attendees. They won't see polls. They will see questions and they see handouts. And that's pretty much it. If you're running this and moderating it, you'll see this X's. This actually takes the option away. Clicking on here will actually bring this into a pop-out box. If you pop out the pop-out box and then you exit out by accident and it disappears from here, go up to the view bar right here and there's a checklist that will drop down and you can re-add it to this. Now, attendees is where you'll see attendees. You'll be able to see their email addresses if you right-click on them, and it will also show another tab that says presenters as well. These are some of the additional ones. When you're on air, which means the broadcast has actually started, you will see show my screen, and you can stop that at any time and pause it, and everybody else will go back to seeing a default screen. You can also mute yourself. So I know that as a presenter and then becoming a moderator, if I'm introducing someone, I generally want to mute myself after they've started rolling, and then I'll pop on again if they have technical difficulties or if someone has a question that needs a right-away answer, or we're nearing the end when we go into the question and answer section of this. I like to say to everybody when we're introing the webinar, we do a little housekeeping first. We're going to record this webinar. It will be available on XYZ website or on YouTube by X number of dates. If people have questions, please ask them as they occur to them, and you guys will address them at the end of the webinar. I would recommend not unmuting people. People a lot of times have no idea about the really interesting background noise, crying babies, rap music, parties that's going on in the background, and it can be really, really distracting, especially for the speaker. Even for a Q&A session at the end, it's better to have them wait until the end to do the Q&A, but ask the questions as they occur to them. And if they need clarification, then we ask them, hey, can you clarify this? And they'll type in their answer saying, well, I was talking about this specifically. Can you go back to slide 12, for example? The other reason to do this is because having the moderator ask the questions versus the presenter ask the questions is many times the presenter will actually get caught up in reading the question to themselves and then just answering the questions, and they're forgetting what they're talking about at that point. And so the audience is sitting there going, what is he talking about? I just lost all frame of reference for that. Now this is a new tab, so keep in mind anything that is the presenter or the moderator, anyone that's in charge of this, that's showing their screen, everything that they see is going to be shown, for example. So right now, new tab, my webinars, my inbox is showing. So when you first start this and you're in screen sharing mode or the presenter is in screen sharing mode, make sure that they're aware that anything that's on their screen might be shown to an audience. So they might want to be cognizant of not just what's up here, but if they don't have full screen mode enabled for their webinar, then people might be able to see what tabs they have open below this. Now these are a couple of the extra things. I really recommend people signing in ahead of time, both the moderator / presenter and any co-presenters, testing out audio first. The microphone and speakers, make sure there's no feedback. If for whatever reason there's feedback, you have trouble logging in, then perhaps have the presenter and the co-presenter log in by phone and see if that makes a difference. I know that many USB hubs where you're plugging in microphone and speakers, just changing those on the home computer can make a big difference in terms of the audio and actual sound. So here's the mute button again. We actually have this little fun arrow up here too where you can minimize the sidebar. So if you're presenting, and you don't want this big box sort of overtaking your screen, because remember, you're the only one, you and anybody else that's in sort of admin mode are the only ones that are going to see this. There's also a markup tool here, and for the moderator, the one key thing is after you've started your broadcast, don't forget to hit start recording. That's a biggie because a lot of people just get carried away with the introduction and they forget. So I always make a little post-it note right before I'm going to run a webinar that's got a couple of key things. Go to the webinar, don't forget to hit record, turn off the phones, shut off the emails, make sure the door is closed, make sure there's no distractions in the room. Now you can also do some branding too. So if you have, logos you want to upload, and then you can customize the theme a little bit and add a welcome message. Now here's where I was talking about where you can send confirmation emails, reminder emails, follow-up emails, and then no recordings for this webinar. By default, any recordings that are made are going to download to your computer. They're not going to be saved to your webinar, your GoToWebinar format itself, unless you actually upload them to that. You'll also see handouts, up to 5 handouts during the webinar. And I tell people if we do have handouts, I tell them in the beginning. I try to have the presenter remind them in the middle of the webinar to remind attendees to download them. And I also say at the end, and then I also mention if people didn't get a chance to download the handouts, please email us and we'll make sure we just email them out to you, because a lot of people do forget. Polls, you can do multiple choice, you can do single choice ones, you can also do surveys. Once you've started your session, you can't upload the handouts through the back end of the GoToWebinar, but you can technically upload them through the control panel, but it glitches a lot. So I just recommend reaching out to your presenters, co-presenters, and if they have handouts, get them to you in advance, load them up in advance, get the polls set and all done in advance. That's all the housekeeping stuff that's on the checklist that's going to be accompanying this. And because it just makes it much easier once you have that all set, you don't have to worry about it last minute. So here's an example of create new poll. And then you do save, and then you can do multiple polls. This is really handy for getting a pulse of, who's on the webinar. If you have specific questions that you want answered, say you were giving an officer training, for example, and you wanted to know who's the VP of PR, who's an area director, you can put all those choice answers in there, and then they could be multiple choice because some people may be, multiple options. Now, when you're in running the webinar itself, and I always recommend if you're going to run polls, set a set time aside depending on how many polls you have to run and what the specific topics are. Prearrange those with the person co-presenting the webinar. Okay, we've got 4 polls we want to run. Okay, after what slides are we going to run them? And make sure that there's a note in the presentation in order to do that, because what will happen otherwise is you go to the end of the presentation and all of a sudden you've realized, oh, there's 4 polls, we forgot to run those, and they're kind of out of sequence. So a lot of people at that point don't bother. So make sure you schedule them and put notes in the webinar itself. Just, we're going to run this poll about XYZ, and then you run that. So, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And then survey for test webinar, there's the survey in here, and it'll go after the webinar is done, in the attendee follow-up email, and also in the absentee follow-up email. So if someone hasn't attended it, for example, there's actually a place in here where it says generate reports. And this is really handy because if you go back and say you have 12 people or 30 people or 300 people register for a webinar, and you get, we'll take the 300 people registering for the webinar is a great option. And of those 300 people, on average, you might have 120 attend. And so you've had, 100 plus people that perhaps have not been able to attend it for whatever reason. So may let you know, you can, since you've taped it, you can send the webinar recording out. You could upload it to YouTube, send the webinar recording out, but you can also put that in that follow-up email. And by generating reports, you can actually see some additional things like who registered but who didn't attend, what their average interest rating was, how long they were actually on the webinar and paying attention to it. You'll see when you're in administration mode, when you've got this big bar on the right hand side and you're moderating it, you can actually see there's going to be a little triangle that shows up that says not paying attention. So you actually be able to tell if someone has clicked over to another tab in their browser while they're watching the webinar. And this is something to keep an eye on, because if you have a presenter and a lot of their attendees are going into not paying attention mode, you need to like give him some sort of message somehow, either verbally, by email if he's paying attention, by chat if he's paying attention, that hey, you need to speed things up a little bit because you're losing the interest of people. Now here's where you'll see attendees and you'll see staff. Staff is where you will show up as the moderator / presenter, any additional presenters, and then any additional panelists. You know, you can invite people ahead of time to be analysts and panelists. The other thing though is you can also make a regular attendee a presenter. So if you right click on their name, for example, it'll give you these options. And you can also unmute specific people. So say you had some people on that you wanted to have on as panelists, they could register the regular way, and then they can actually just stay as in attendee mode, but then they have the ability to speak. All you need to do is click on this, and then they're unmuted. And you can also dismiss someone too. I've never actually had the occasion to do this, but I have heard if you have someone that's, for example, a panelist for whatever reason, and you know their phone rings or whatever, and you know they're not coming back on, and they forget they're online, you can actually kind of kick them off the call. Generally, what I'll do though is just keep an eye on this, and then just mute them. And when they want to come back on, they'll let you know, and then unmute. When you switch presenters, they're actually going to see this. You have been made the presenter, and you can switch back. If you're the administrator and you've started running this, you can switch back and forth at any time between presenters. So say your presenter had a technical difficulty, you know, their screen shut down, they lost their connection or whatever. If you need to, you can take control of the screen again in a pinch just by right-clicking on your own name and then switching it back over to you. This is what a poll looks like. So, and organizers and panelists don't vote. The only person that will actually see this poll is you as the organizer running this. So keep in mind your presenter is, I've heard different things about this. I've heard that they see the screen, but I've also heard that a lot of them don't see the screen. So honestly, I've tried this on various different ones and sometimes on different screens and logged in as different people. I have seen this as the co-presenter, and sometimes it doesn't show up. From the moderator / organizer standpoint, I would assume that the presenter may not be able to see this screen and see the results of it. So you might want to actually, you know, run off, okay, you know, we've got 40% saying yes and 20% saying no, and a couple saying sort of, let's wait for a couple of minutes while people continue to put their polling in. When at that point where people haven't filled polls in for about 10 seconds, you can just give them a reminder, hey, if anybody hasn't done this yet, could you please do it right now? Give it another 5 seconds, because people do this really quickly unless you have really, really long questions that they want to address. And then just shut the poll down, read the results, and then shut it off and continue with it. Now, once you're finished with it, thank the presenters, do your housekeeping again, remind them it's been recorded, remind them if they have questions that they didn't get answered, that they can email. Thank everybody for attending. Good night and hasta vista. And then just go and click at the top right of your pop-out box, and it will give you this box. And then just say end webinar for all. And this box will pop up. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds if you don't see it right away. And then you'll hit whatever it was, and then you'll hit convert recording. At that point, that recording will end up as an MP4 on your computer somewhere on your desktop. So you might need to go find it, but the easiest way to find it is just go into Open Recordings folder. The one other thing that I do want to note too is sometimes when you're logged into GoToWebinar and you hit full screen, the box to the right where everything is moderated and run, you may not technically actually see that. So you just actually have to click around to the right-hand side and or minimize your screen again, and then that box should show up. Remind the co-presenter of that fact too, because I've had people get on as a co-presenter and they're like, oh my God, where'd the administrative panel go on? It'll always come back. You just have to click around a little bit for it. So again, that's pretty much it. It will really run you through this. It's very, very functional. The best way to do this realistically is just, go into GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, run some test webinars. It is very straightforward for the most part. All of it is, like I said, the one thing that confuses people sometimes is the pop-out boxes in the main part of the right-hand screen board. If you pop it out and you exit, it will disappear. But again, you can go up to view and it will come back again. And that's pretty much it.